both on your literature review and chapter 3 and the way to build scenarios. So first, on your literature reviews, did you look at who was implied in the scenario construction in the report?
Yes. That is a very interesting question that we did not capture in the first chapter. But when I looked after listening to this question, it is that what I know about these scenario studies that they're usually made by experts.
Yes.
And thus many diverse stakeholders, for example, the community members are not usually captured. And that may be also why there's only one single dominant paradigm that is prevailing.
Yeah, so it's more expert-based and which type of experts?
Like sometimes I guess policy economists often, I think. Yeah, policy economists and also the technology related experts.
Yeah. So this is related to the fact that if we try to forecast the disrupting future, if we take the people who make the rule today, they are maybe not the only actors that would be questioned about this. And so this is now related to your case studies and how you build scenarios. Of course, you have no time in your PhD to investigate stakeholders, but what do you think about your case studies? Would you still build the scenarios the same? Or do you think you should associate other stakeholders that would help you to refine your scenarios?
Yes, I think it is very important to have diverse set of stakeholders. For example, many scenario studies missed the thing about pandemic, but it was nothing new among healthcare professions. Also in the intelligence report, it was like one of the top issues that we should consider for the future. So when we have our life cycle assessment method, it can be very important to, if we have like, for example, human health impact, it could be very important to actually engage all the human health experts. For now, we ran the LCA and used the LCA data, but the experts in human health might have different opinions when selecting the data. So I think it's important to have also diversify experts, but also can be the local communities that are affected by the system and the customers of the products can also be, it can be very multidimensional.
Yeah, and so precisely on your case studies.
In my case study, it was like me. Like one from each. Yes, this was not very.
You have to do it tomorrow.
I have to do it tomorrow from next 5 years. How many people do I have? Yes. How much funding? Yeah. I have all the time and money. Then it would be great. It would be great to have some focus group interviews as well, right? So, for example, our case study is sustainable aviation fuel. Then it would be nice to bring together people in the sustainable aviation fuel industry, but also the users of the flights and the local community that is affected by, people living, I don't know, like because of it's like where the product is produced. And also we have residual biomass, so the producers of them can also be involved in. I could have, if I can have time in 1 year.
Okay. And one of my questions related to that is that by considering your functional units, don't you already define a scenario?
Do I? So our functional unit is 1 unit, so it does not imply any amount of demand.
Yeah.
So, but it is possible that you can have large demand or small demand. For example, the reference study that I mentioned has a functional unit of the entire globe, the demand of the flight, and it does increase for the longer term future. But as you mentioned, demand can decrease, right? This is not captured in most of the studies at the moment. So also because I did it in a unit, but if I do it in a different functional unit, I think it's possible to have the actual functional unit decrease or increase depending on the scenarios.
Or even the nature.
Yes.
The way to travel.
Right, exactly. Exactly. It doesn't have to be flight, passenger transport. It can be transport, and it can be mix of trains, flights.
Exactly. Yes. So and this you cannot capture if you only work with the aviation.
No. Yes.
So for example, in France we have like a SHIFT project, which is an association of engineers specialized on climate change solutions.
Yes.
if you involve them in this study, they will tell you that their solution that the total aviation decrease.
Yes.
So this kind of scenarios, this kind of stakeholder would bring another scenario. I don't say it's better. I just say that they bring another point of view.
Yes.
That could be interesting to integrate. So I think one of the key questions of your work, which is really nice because it's modular, so it helps to characterize the priorities of the different stakeholders, but also they should, and I think it will help with the limitation we talked about in the end about the ability of the stakeholders to understand such complex results, but if they are associated to the elaboration of the model, in fact, then they better understand.
That is true.
Yes. So this was one of my comments, and I made you also the comment in my report concerning the fact that we distinguish co-products and circular economy or use of waste.
Yes.
In my opinion, it's the same. It's just that you have constraints, inputs or constraints outputs, but both of them are constraints. So why did you distinguish them? Is there any specificities that you need on each of them that justify the fact that you separate?
Yes. I can totally understand that the pillar 2 circular economy feedstock and the pillar 4 co-product substitution can be related. Actually, from our process, when we have co-products, these pillar 4 options can be the pillar 2 for other processes. Exactly, right? Because they are constrained. But the reason that we separated them is that how they function in our system is a bit different, and how we select our data is different because, for example, when we have circular economy that they are constrained, so we have to consider the counterfactual use that we take away. But for them, themselves are constrained, but when they enter the market and we consider this substitution, the substituted market is not constrained. So in that sense, so they are actually the same part of the coin, but when we have the logic of data selection, we separated them for easier data selection.
But in fact, you suppose that the substitution market is not defined, but
it could
may not be.
Yeah.
And it could, according to the size of the market, change the substitution mechanisms. So what do you think of that?
I think this is also one of the limitations that everything was done in one unit. But as you said, if whether the co-product is a small part of a big market or a big part of a small market, it will be very different. For example, if we're going to produce a lot of propane and then it enters the market and the refrigerant market is smaller than the fuel market, obviously, so there's not enough, and that will be very different. And I think that should be also be analyzed with more care.
So that's why I think when studying transitions, globally, I think that the unit functional unitary is probably not a good scale because I think we miss some important aspects. In the perspective, this could be also an important aspect. Still concerning this substitution, in fact, about pillar 2, so you will assume the counterfactual use, which means, if I understand well, I'm not sure I understand, you analyze what waste cooking oil is used for today.
Yes.
And you say, now in my solution, I use waste cooking oil, so it's not used anymore for this existing counterfactual use. And to my opinion, why would it be different than the co-product production? I mean, the fact that you replace the existing use is better for human health or climate change. Did you account this? I mean, the fact that you replace, maybe you don't, because could be better for human health?
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the logic here is that when we have BAU or human health or climate change world, the entire world is following this logic. So when we do the selection, it's also the practitioner that, oh, I want to have this option to be human health friendly,
Okay.
but the entire world is already human health friendly and climate change friendly in this option. So
Okay.
that means that the actually, for example, waste cooking oil, the option for BAU, business as usual, and the human health and climate change are different
Okay.
because, for example, now we throw away most of the cooking oil. But in the future, even in BAU, it will be that, okay, they are not thrown away anymore. There's nothing to like divert from the throwaway. So we have to divert the one is being combusted. And the thing for the human health and climate change is that because they are more health and climate conscious world, even in 2035, there is not enough waste cooking oil that no waste cooking oil they are disposed. So we already have to divert the ones that are being combusted.
All right. Okay, I understand. Okay. So it's not that clear to me. And okay. And another yes, the question of your result, you say in the end, you say I improve, I put a minus, it's below zero or it's above zero. So what is your zero? Is it the initial study 2022?
No, zero is real zero, like
right.
Zero emission. Yeah.
Yes, I was wondering.
Yeah.
So zero emission. Okay. So it's below zero as the
absolute value of greenhouse gas
Sure.
emission. Yes.
Okay. And finally, if I come back to your initial literature review, sorry, I'm not in the other.
Yeah, it's fine. I can go back.
I was wondering when you talk about relationships that are positive or negative.
Yes.
So I would prefer increasing or decreasing because positive can be understood as benefits, which is not always the case. Do you know if maybe did you investigate in this scenario accounting if the relationship has a shape, if it's linear, if it's not linear, if it's
yes, that's a good point. So we did not investigate the linearity or the degree of the connection. So for example, there can be stronger connection, like one moves this much and the other moves this much.
Yes.
But that is not captured in this study, only the direction.
Okay, and how, so you made these arrows according to reading the text, or did you look at the model? No, not the model, just reading
the text.
Okay. And how did you do that? I mean,
it is very tedious work. So, and in the end, I used a bit of Python to go through. But in the first work was all manual and go through and then mark the variables. So if I recommend someone to reproduce this work, please start coding quickly.
Yeah. So you code, but you had yes, I saw you harmonized terms, and so code programs that analyze the text.
So in the beginning, it was all manual and Excel and so on. And in the end, I used Python to verify what I checked. So actually identifying the variables, there could have been something that I already missed because what I verified in the end was already the variables that I had, right? So I check if I had them all. So in that sense, there can be something missing.
Okay. And did you also analyze the occurrence of the terms? I mean, if they are more stated, I mean, if one aspect is more emphasized, for example?
No.
Okay.
Just how many times, not how many times within one study, but how many studies mentioned it is.
Okay. And so now that you have picked this tool, what do you think? How it could be used? Do you think other people could use it, or do you think it still needs some improvement before being used by others.
It can always have more
Yes, of
improvement.
course,
Yeah.
but-
But I mean, I think it already can be used to have brief idea of how the studies work, because as shown in the thesis itself, the shapes of the connection looks very different.
Yes.
Like some are more linear, some are more circular, and also you can find different variables. So for the people, because there are so many scenario studies and they are used for many like policies or industries. So if you want to get an idea of what are the important things and how they're connected, they can have a look and have a brief idea, and also to see, what are the focuses of the study. I think it can, but it can definitely be more improved. It can be even be interactive.
Yeah, and in your own scenarios, you try to make this
Oh,
on your case study.
interesting. Yeah, because our scenario is actually very simple logic, right? Because I think there was also comment like, okay, there were many connections that were discovered here, and were they used for my framework? Is that, I guess, no, because what we found is, okay, they have underlying logic that is simple, so we want to diversify it, but because we actually did not develop new scenarios, which is very complex work, we need some experts or like also stakeholders to be involved. So now it's very simple: prioritizing human health, prioritizing climate change, right? So it is a bit simple that we don't have complex causal relationships like this.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It could be
Could be
something that
interesting, yes.
could be produced
Mhm.
from your own, because it could also help you maybe to identify scenarios that you didn't account.
Yes.
Because you would say, oh, I know there is this relationship and I didn't account for it. So it helps you maybe define the possibilities.
Yes, that is true.
And so all these possibilities, how do you calculate them? I mean,
Calculate what?
your scenarios. Do you use Python or Singapore or?
Yeah, I used activity browser and Singapore.
Oh,
Yes, both of them. Yeah.
So thank
Yeah.
Okay. And do you think you will publish this work?
Yeah.
Can we
hopefully,
comment?
yeah.
You should.
Yeah, the first one, this is published.
Yes.
Yes, the second and third is not, but yes, we will work on.
Yeah, I really advise you to do it. And maybe, yes, to better analyze how your work could be used in existing background database like Premise.
Yes.
Because the people who develop the Premise, they are aware that they should define their scenarios. They know, but it's in a specific prioritization and especially economy without any other aspects. So
Yes.
it could be interesting. And did you try to change the guiding stars? Because you say it's modular, but you show only three: human health, climate change, and economy. For example, resource, mineral resource.
We haven't done it.
You didn't try?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. It's of course you are in bioeconomy, so maybe mineral resources not your mainstream, but it could be very important. For example, in your electric
Exactly.
in your electric scenario.
Yes.
There is a strong aspect of mineral resources. And you think this could be compatible with accounting for planet boundaries?
Interesting. There is a project combining the aviation fuel and planetary boundary. Why is he not here today? And I mean, this is a data collection method, so it can be applied even when you consider planetary boundary. I guess you can also have the guiding stars as one of these planetary boundary, right? Like for what were the others? Yes, as the guiding star, right? So you want to minimize the impact in each planetary boundary, and also as the impact assessment. So it can either
What are the constraints?
now is a constraint. Good point, because it is about the constraint. Yeah, I think it is totally possible. When you select the data, you make sure, then you definitely need a functional unit that is larger than unitary. Yes. Yeah. And then you also have to consider to which territorial scope it will be, and the time scope.
Especially for biology.
Yes.
So it was one also my comments that for the availability of the resource, especially from circular economy, you probably limited in time scope and in the graph scope. But considering that as a constraint would be interesting.
Yes.
Because if you do it, maybe you are limited in the amount of what you can produce.
Yes. And also, I guess in the end, it can also be a mix of technologies. Now it's comparing 8 technologies, but in the end, it's not, may not be that you only use one fuel for all the flights.
Yes.
So, okay. Thank you, Anne, for this question. So now I will invite Linda Anthony, researcher in array. So Linda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ludovic. Could you hear me?
Yes, not loud enough. Okay.
It's
Hello.
okay. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. So thank you for this enlightening presentation, which complements the manuscript. Well done for the pedagogical approach used to explain this complex work. So bravo, bravo. The aim of this thesis is to provide decision support for the construction and evaluation of transition scenario in the context of bioeconomy. I think it's a very, very important subject now and for the future. So I think it's a good idea to perform this thesis and to propose such challenging approach. Before my question, I have to say I totally agree with Anne's questions and remarks. I think it's very important to consider stakeholders, to think about the co-product and the substitution rules in the different contexts. And I think the causal loop diagram approach is a very, very good approach to consider the context. I think also the research question is explicit, clear, ambitious, and associated with achievable research objectives within the framework of this thesis. The manuscript based on 3 publications describe the methodology and application well. Maybe I have one regret, is that the originality of the work is not positioned with regard to recent developments in LCA Prospective and in LCA and also in LCA Prospective. Prospective LCA, sorry. So my first question is about that. Could you precisely position your work and its originality? I'm sure it's very original in relation to current practice in LCA Prospective.
Thank you for the question. Very difficult question. I don't know if I know all the things going on in the research world about prospective LCA, but one of the common ones that I've seen is, as mentioned, premise, the combining IM, integrated assessment models, and LCA. And I did refer, that was very inspirational. And I think it's also one of the reasons that we did this method to overcome the limitation that they could have, because IM is a computational model without limitation, as I mentioned. So there are underlying logics, and the economic, like for example, cost optimization is often embedded in many of the IMs, not all, but so we want to overcome, like, what can we do to be free from this underlying assumptions, but also with IM, which is great that you can have a global scope and very diverse sectors, but we also, it's very difficult to use for anybody, like any researcher in not in the IM field. You need some expert to work together. But if you want to do LCA, not every LCA practitioner can work with IM experts. Of course, they will have general database made, but it is restricted to the scenarios that are selected by those studies. But if you want to have a completely different scenario that is not generated by the experts who combine IM and LCA database, then you have to make your own. but doing it as complex as that, it will be very difficult for everybody. So this is a bit more accessible and a bit also more transparent and is simple in a way. Yes. And I also read Anne's work on transition LCA, right? So for that is definitely considering the territorial scope. And also I found it interesting that you can have different functional unit, and what happens within is that you can have different services, right? You don't even have to have the aviation industry, for example, and then you can compare it. And I guess for my work can also be like, you still have to select the data. You choose what activities belong in these systems, but you still have to make the same data for selection. And this method can be used there. And also when I mentioned compatibility with the IEM studies will generate this big data set, especially for electricity, heat, cement, steel. And it can also be like, but for us, if we have a system that is using like rubber, it might not be the priority for the IEM studies to generate data for this, but we can still use the data set generated from them for the big sectors, and then still have this data selection method that we developed as like a compatible method.
Okay, thank you for the answer. Maybe we can go on concerning methodological development for prospective LCA. You said that your methodological development impacts only or especially the inventory phase of LCA. But in my opinion, your developments have an impact on the free stage of LCA, goal and scope definition, inventory analysis, and results interpretation. Do you agree with this? And could you identify the main points of modification for the interpretation stage, especially?
Yes, yeah, it is definitely going through the first phase, the goal and scope, and the in the inventory phase. And not that we tried, but it inevitably affects the interpretation phase. We try to make it more easy to interpret, but I guess it was not the main focus to, okay, how do we systematically interpret it? That is not yet developed. We did try to make different kind of graphs and tables to aid the interpretation, but I think I need more study to find out what can be a better interpretation method for LC.
Okay, and you focus on inventory phase and also goal and scope definition, and especially system boundaries. But I think your methodology affects maybe also the way to define the functional unit, the way to define the system boundaries. And I think it's very important to have a clear explanation of your impact, if you're of the impact of your methodological developments on LCA, because I think it's a good thing to have different practices of your methodology and different case studies of your when we use your methodology.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to add something about that?
No, I think it's a great idea.
Okay. Maybe concerning the chapter 2, you used the concept of driver concerning the literature review and how transition scenarios are constructed. Why don't you use this concept in your methodological developments? I think it's an interesting concept to describe the links between your system, your studied system, and the context. And I think you well done the description between the context and the scenarios in the chapter 2, thanks to this concept of driver.
Yes. I think it was also previously commented that, yeah, it would have been really great if I could actually utilize the connections that I found. The more, for example, I had results for like what are the most connections that were used the most, like across the studies, or what were like least important, like not mentioned at all. So I think it would have been interesting to also utilize these drivers when we develop the framework. But for now, our focus of the framework was to make it more accessible and simple. So now we have like one, like human health only, like climate change only. So it does reveal a radically different future where like we don't care about the cost as long as we can mitigate the climate change. But of course, it doesn't capture the complexity of the future that we can have. So further on, I guess guiding stars can also be not just one guiding star, but can be like what kind of driver sets are used in this future. I think that was very interesting.
Okay, let's move on case study. When analyzing the results, you compare the impacts of the different time frame in the manuscript. Does this make sense? And if so, could you explain why?
Yes, good point. So we have different results for 2035 and 2050, and that is because we made different selections for the data. But as you mentioned, if we only use guiding star, the difference between 2035 and 2050 shouldn't be the difference, right? Okay, if we're gonna maximize human health, what we do in 2035 and what we do in 2050 should be the same. Like we choose the one that is the lowest climate change impact, if it's a climate change world. But the problem is that often many of the technologies that are low in climate change impact may not be available yet in near-term future. For example, in our assessment, the PEM, polymer electrolyte membrane technology for producing hydrogen for electrolysis, was the lowest in human climate change impact, but it may not be mature enough in 2035. So these were some of the differences that we made between the years, like the maturity, the technical or economical viability of the technologies. And also in some cases, like in co-product substitution, propane will be, we assumed it to substitute cooking service because cooking in the open air, it has very high human health impact. So replacing that would be beneficial for human health. And from our preliminary RCA, charcoal had the worst impact. So it would be great if we can replace both, like charcoal in 2035 and 2050. And you can say that in some cases, 2035, 2050 options are the same. But because we assume that this world is where human health is prioritized, it may also, the society may phase out the one that is really bad. So in 2050, for example, it may be already phased out, especially in refrigerants. For example, the ones that we use here are these two, but there are already regulations that are banning certain types of refrigerants. So for example, so these two are both not banned by law yet, but since the first one has higher global warming potential, there is a talk that in European Union or in US that this may come to a restriction. So in 2035, it can be used, but in 2050, the other one with less global warming potential. So this will actually, if we substitute the second one, we save less because it's not as bad as the first one. But the first one in 2050 may not even be in use, so we cannot substitute it. So this kind of logic was used between the two timeframes in such cases.
Okay, so I understand the logical between the two time frames, but my question focuses on the reason why you compared the environmental impacts between the both time frames. I think I'm pretty sure you did that in your manuscript.
Yes. It's also because when we make investment decisions, some facility can last 20 years, some facility can last 30 years. So if some things can be really good for 20, for example, biofuels, some biofuels are better in 2035, but may not be in 2050, right? But if the investment is that, oh, if it's good for first 20 years and it's still better to use it, that could be the reason that we differentiate the results. Yes, that's good. Yeah. Depending on the time scope of the investment. Everything won't be lasting 100 years. So as a transition, some options may be better in early stage.
Okay. Okay. Maybe another question concerning stakeholders. I have the same question as Han concerning the role of stakeholders during the construction of a scenario. So I don't ask again the same question, and I insist on this point. It's really important to consider stakeholders for the scenario construction, but also, I think also to open the black box of prospective LCA. Do you agree with that concerning the second point, open the black box of LCA prospective and consider take into account the opinions and maybe the position of the different stakeholders within the methodological developments and of the prospective LCA?
Yes. I don't know how to open up the LCA black box. I guess there are many black boxes, not as complicated as computational models, but I think it will be interesting to actually share how this method works. And then, okay, for example, counterfactual use was big because of this and that. We don't think about it easily, but these are the hidden reasons. So because when general public sees a LCA study, probably they don't even see a LCA study. It might be a producer saying that, oh, our product is better than the competitors, and they did an LCA study, and that's the reason, but they don't give any assumptions. Like, okay, what were the electricity? What was the original aspect? So I think it will be very interesting to actually share these aspects when you involve stakeholders into the LCA. Yeah, I think that, so it's, for now, I only mentioned it for the guiding star. When you select the guiding star, they can be involved, but I think it would be also interesting to actually open up the secrets of LCA and tell people what things can be involved, and that can also influence their logic when they get involved in the scenario making.
Okay, and another question concerning the future and maybe disruptive future, transformative future. Could you imagine a use of your prospective LCA in the context of non-economic growth?
Non-economic, what was it? Growth. Yes. Like, for example, if we are to assume a world that maximizes climate change mitigation, and of course, as I think it's also maybe combined with what Anne asked about the functional unit, there can be actual demand decrease of such service. So I think it's very important to consider that, which is what's not captured here, but I guess we can capture that by expanding the functional unit. And non-economic growth, I think it is a very important one of the reasoning behind this method, that, okay, the ever-growing GDP, it's not that it's bad, but it is the only option, and we should consider other options, because we could have decreasing economic, so-called economic growth, and still have prosperity. So it's also what GDP captures is not all the prosperity we have. So I think it can definitely capture the economic, what was it called? Non-growth. Yes, but how? I have to think about it more. If I have more time or something. I think it's very interesting. Yes.
Okay. And maybe last question concerning the complexity of prospective LCA. These developments are relatively complex and lead to complex results. And how can these developments, which seem promising to me, be made operational?
Operational. I think it will also be interesting to do another LCA on different sector, as I mentioned. So then to see what are the key points that come out. So this was aviation fuel, but if we do it for food and feed, that could also be very different. But then there might be also a way to find out what were the key points. And here now I went to the, okay, 1 point, 2 point, and all the points. But if we can actually kind of sieve out the, yeah, I think that could help the interpretation. And what else? Do you have any suggestions?
Maybe I think if you open up the black box of RCA prospective RCA, it will be easier to explain the results and maybe facilitate the interpretation for stakeholders. If you hope that stakeholders understand well the results without any explanation concerning the methodology, I think it's a bad idea. I think the solution, one of this solution, is to open up the black box of LCA Prospective, not all the black box of LCA. That's, I agree with you, but I think it's really important to consider stakeholders during the LCA and not only for the results interpretation.
Yes, that is also a good point. I guess when the stakeholder involved during the method and deciding IDSTAR and other parts, then the key point can also be emphasized in the result interpretation. For example, for certain community or stakeholders, like, I don't know, the co-product subsidy can be more important. And for example, then that can be emphasized, or certain impact category may be more important. If it's like a water scarcity region, water depletion will be much more impact than the climate change. So yeah, thank you for the advice.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers and congratulations again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. So now it's Professor Steven Van Vassel to ask some question. Steven, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to read your work. So I will first start to say that I really enjoyed reading what you did. There are very, very nice and original ideas in your work. And I also want to congratulate you already with one publication. As already mentioned, I also encourage you to submit the other chapters for publications, and I think you already submitted some chapters there. So success with that. But of course, I have also the opportunity to ask you some questions, and I will do that. A first question is to challenge you a little bit about the starting point, about the alternative decision making paradigms other than costs.
Yes.
And I wonder, and I really like the idea to do that, and I see the reference that you made, for example, to the donut model, and but can you really explain me to start, and then I will go deeper, why it's really needed, and because of course you will see that there will be other results, but why is it really needed? Does that mean that you think, or that you claim, that we need a kind of other kind of societal model, and compared to the mixed economic model, where we are not a full capitalist model, but how do you see that? Do you think we need to have a kind of planned economy, or how do you see that? What's the really need to look into those alternative decision-making paradigms?
Yes, my personal opinion.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So the method was to have it modular. So practitioners and stakeholders can choose the guiding stars. I am not here to present that this is the way that we should go. We should go on a planned economy where climate change is prioritized and nothing else. But this can be the option. And I guess now that it's simple, but in the future, it can be a bit more complex. For example, the costs can be also considered together with other guiding stars, or one can be capped and one to minimize and so on. But my personal opinion, I don't think planned economy is a good idea. And I have belief in humanity that we can actually have a radically different future considering these different factors as important. And I found it kind of interesting when I wrote this, that, okay, we want to have a possibility of consider radically in extreme futures. And this extreme future is where we value human health. And why do we call this a radically different future? Shouldn't it be already like this, or social justice? So I think it is already the thing that in our human mind, we say, okay, I want to have a radically different future when human health is important. People will be like, what are you talking about? It's like, we do value human health and human life, right? So it is within us, but in the models, that many of the models that we use, they may not be as much captured as individual things.
But I think, and that's linked to my follow-up question on that, I think that's very important what you state here. Right? Here you talk about economic value. And that's, in my opinion, certainly not the same as costs. While in your next slide, you narrow down the economic perspective as a cost perspective. While I'm an environmental economist, while we try to prefer to talk about value, where you also internalize external costs. And look into the different types of value compared to the cost perspective. So I wonder, is it that all current prospective LCAs really start from a cost perspective, or is it also that they start from the economic value perspective, in your opinion?
Like, for example, having I forgot the name. Externalities, how the externalities are captured in cost. I think that is, so this is sort of like bringing society and nature into the cost, right? Because cost is how we function. I guess we can also expand it like this, but bring these values into cost, because this is the logic, the grammar that we understand, not me, but like our society understands the best, and how the industry works as well. I think that is one of the good idea ways. And what was the question? And externalities.
Yeah. No, because in the end, if you look, you can think about cost minimization, but in the end, it's our economy is driven by profit maximization, and that's not the same often. And so that's. But I will come back to that later on. But let's now go, if you agree, to your second chapter. And there were already some questions and discussions, and I will start with the kind of idea. And I was wondering if it was your idea, or did you read it somewhere? Because in the end, I'm used to causal loop diagrams, and it's often used in system analysis, where you do and this kind of. But you, although you picked the system, you did it as a kind of tool for a review, and to find was that how did you came up to that idea? How was that inspiration? Is that new? Is that the first time that was done, or was it already done in other papers to do it like this?
Good question. There are many studies that use causal loop diagram for system
Yeah,
change,
no.
as you mentioned, but it has been 3 years. I don't exactly remember where it came from, but I did discuss the topic with my supervisor, Lori, all week, every week. So I think it could have come from it definitely came from our discussion. I think maybe she brought it first and we did, okay, this could be an interesting way to represent it. So we didn't get it from specific like study or paper that used causal loop diagram, but it was more like, okay, can they be connected this way? And then I think she came up with, okay, there was something called causal loop.
Yeah, I think it's was, and I will dig into that because you do it and it's very nice. It's published, but that novelty. So the idea of using the causal loop diagrams to review and to answer kind of review paper question is not really mentioned, although in my opinion, but maybe I missed several other papers doing that. It's quite interesting, and starting from that point, thinking about maybe doing that ourselves in for other topics. I have some questions about the fact when you do this and when you explain this in the slides and the previous slide, you mentioned we have the balancing loops and reinforcing loops, but in the end it's not that you really use those loops in the diagrams. So it's not that you really designed the loops and I wonder, so you focused on the direction of the relationships, but it's not that you focused on the kind of the loops themselves. So is there a specific reason for that?
Yes, like if you mentioned here, you can see that the loops close.
Yeah.
Not so. It's because we didn't design the system. We were, as you mentioned, reviewing the existing studies and how their worldview was constructed. So when we followed the logic, they were not closing, so they were not coming back. I think it was one of also the comment that the characteristics that the nature outcome don't come back to the society, but as we know, it does have big impact. So I think that could be actually one of the limitations of these scenario studies, that they don't close the loop. And it was not our intention to not close them. It was just following the study. Yes.
And linking to that, I was wondering, because you identified and you one of your end results is that you say, there are not a lot of feedback loops, so few feedback loops. And I wonder if this is specifically the topic, or is maybe also linked to the kind of method that you use. So is your approach, the approach that I like, but is that approach able to detect all the kind of feedback loops in this way?
Yes. So as I mentioned before, we went through the text only. So there can be computational models that are actually have these feedback loops embedded, but not shown in the papers or reports. But then it also means that they were not considered, can be that they were not as important as also those connections. But of course, we could not capture all the computational model assumptions, like endogenic assumptions that they have, but some study was only qualitative, so there was no model, and in that case, hopefully we captured all the things that, but then of course the report is a final representation of their work, so there could be many discussions between the export or embedded in the model, the relationship that we did not discuss.
Okay. And maybe another question, and now I have to look, is about the kind of robustness of your results. It was already discussed, of course. You were reading, and then I was wondering how, if you want to improve your method, let's call it your method, using the causal loop diagrams, and you discussed the limitation of the study, as you should do yourself. And you refer to a certain degree of interpretation, and that's common. And I wonder how, if you would have additional time, are the kind of strategies that you can think of to reduce that degree of interpretation, and how would you do that?
So So now I think also mentioned and Linda's question
Yeah.
that now
But I'm still at the causal loop diagrams, eh?
I'm still at the causal diagram.
Yeah. So when you have the causal loop diagrams and you made several ones and then you made that interesting overview table. But my question is, it's of course you are reading the texts and you are putting numbers and relationships. So the question that I have is how would you, what can you do to lower that degree of interpretation?
That is a very good question. So here, especially initial selection, the variables themselves were done manually. So it is very subjective to my interpretation. What were the important variables? So I think degree of using machine learning and natural language processing can be very helpful in actually going through the entire text and finding out which variables, which words came up the most and how they were connected. Then also, I guess you have to code like what kind of expressions mean causal relationship, what means critique. Of course, if it's like, oh, having more farmers mean more, I don't know. Okay, so there can be very obvious languages that can be detected. Oh, this decreased this, but there can be other more subtle ones. So I think definitely then we need more technological help, and I think that can be very beneficial.
And would it be an idea that you go back to the authors after designing a causal loop diagram and you just ask them to, if possible, to verify, is this, and just to check and to see, is this possible that this reflects what you did? Would that be an option, or would that be kind of, do you expect, did you had any response from one of the 7 study authors on your, and would you, it can be of interest to contact them and send the paper and see about their feedback?
I think that is actually a very good idea, because there can definitely be many things that I have missed that they found as important. Or they could also have like, okay, this is not what you said, like they very opposing idea. I think it's a very good idea.
But also the other way around, to see it positive, that you detect things that they were not aware of.
Yes, I think that's actually a really good idea. Except that these studies are mostly done by big organizations. So it's not really 1 or 2 individuals that are involved. And of course, with the SSP, it's like a big computational model community behind it, like this much people in one paper. So I don't think they are also very high profile studies. So I guess they don't have time to look at my study. Maybe that's
don't say that.
So until now there were no context, but I think it will be very interesting also, especially in some study you might know 1 or 2 authors of the studies and start discussing, and some of them are periodical, so it can be interesting.
And one, it's more common, of course, is the causal relationship directions, because it's kind of and especially in econometrics and economics, it's often a huge issue. What's driving what, and is it causal or is it correlation? And looking into the table and the design, and I have often the idea that it's not completely clear if it's correlation or causality. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. So of course, if one grows and the other grows, it doesn't mean that it is causal, but we define them as causal because we looked into the text saying that, okay, here we said that when this, that's true, that's good point, because they said, oh, they increased and this increased. So I think I tried to capture the one that when they assume that, oh, it was because of that, but it's also possible that they were just reading the result that, oh, this caused possible.
No, okay, thank you. And now let's go to the final block. It's about your methods, and I like the idea to structure that. You see the kind of the way how you come from the LCA community, and where you really try to put in pillars and guiding stars, and that's very nice to see. And I will kind of reflect on the following, and I think it's very novel, and I wonder, because your reference scenario and what you call sometimes the kind of cost minimization, sometimes it's business as usual, but is it from a so when you look at your tables, you often say business as usual, but can you really claim that it's business as usual? Because often when we look to the kind of changes that will be done, it's not business as usual, because there will be kind of implications, there will be economic change, and so there will be kind of different energy mixes based on climate policy and on ongoing agreements. So is there a specific reason that you call that business as usual?
That is a good point. I know there is no specific reason we call it business as usual. It was more that it's a paradigm that was business as usual. But as you said, in some cases, also the business as usual can mean like, okay, is it business as usual before we started talking about climate change mitigation, or is it with this Paris Agreement?
Yeah.
So there is a blurry distinction, but for us, it was a bit more conceptual that it is about just prioritizing costs. So we wanted to call it business as usual, but there's a bit.
But it boils down to the question, and I like your approach. Let's make that sure, because you often have a lot of, and you refer to the start to do the kind of complex models used by large institutions, where they have business as usual scenarios, then they have climate change scenarios, Paris, and then within that they have then the Paris Agreement scenario and all the others, and in the end, and you have your stars, but in the end, those models also do that, but they do it differently. While you do it like this or that, they have a kind of more fluently ID, but more black box. So. And yeah, so I was wondering, what do you think you can convince those kind of modelers to do it in this way, or do you think that they will keep on using kind of business as usual, and then the shared socioeconomic pathways and so on and so on?
I think it's a very interesting question. And as you mentioned, most of the studies already have variation, like, for example, oh, this is the current policy scenario. So I guess it's equivalent to business as usual. And then this is a sustainable development where everything is below 2. This is IEA scenario, 2 degrees. So they do differentiate it, but what we found is it's still the underlying logic can be the costs, maybe the cost optimization. I think it's possible to tweak the model, especially if it's not the most heavy one. Like you can change the model to have different underlying logic, right? I'm not familiar with the model, but we talked to some other people, and if we have more time and effort, I think it was possible. It would be definitely possible. I think there is also a movement to. Because IM has been criticized a lot about being a black box and like having, also like what is it, depreciation of the costs for the future. Maybe the percentage is too high and so on. So I think those numbers can definitely be changed if they want to.
And linked to that, it's a question, and now you used as example the kind of human health and climate change in compared to the kind of cost minimization. And I was wondering if your approach could also be used, for example, in a kind of guiding star where you have a concept like, and because this is really the donut economy, but traditional, and I like that concept. It's from ecological economics, but when traditional environmental economics, they will often refer to to a concept as, for example, bounded rationality, meaning that we do not all minimize our costs because although we are assumed to be rational, sometimes we do kind of stupid things because we are blurred and often bounded. So we are, and would it be possible to use your kind of viewpoint also for this kind of concept where you say, there is a different background. We know that we are all not fully economic orientated people, and some people are distracted and there is bounded rationality. So they are not fully rational. So they sometimes will opt for losing money because they really see it differently, because they do not, they have a limited rational framework. Could that be also an option as an alternative value for decision making?
Yes, I think it is possible, and I agree with that. The rationality of human beings are overrated, especially in economics. And it's maybe not that we sometimes are irrational. I think we're mostly irrational, and the economic is way too optimistic about that. So of course it can be, I don't know how it can be integrated into this specific model, but I'm sure it's possible to have, like, we have a world where I think, because there's also big movement in using the agent-based modeling to maybe capture this difference on how individuals will work, and not just like everyone work rationally, economically. Okay. So yeah, I think it's would be great.
Okay, maybe a final question, and it's more about the end user, and it's linked. It's maybe it's already discussed in a way, but let's frame it differently. When you have as you show, and you have the different guiding stars, and in the end you have different in fact your range of end results are even bigger, as you shown with the case study, and as you say, that was it becomes from strong negative to strong positive depending on so. And I wonder, for decision makers, if they really want that, and it's that it really makes it for them even more difficult and sometimes impossible to choose. Although from a scientific point you say, this is what we offer, but then they will say, but what should we do now? And now it's really complicated. And in the end, you will not help them, but even confuse them. Yes. But now I'm challenging you. So how do you think that?
I think that's definitely true. They would not want it. But at the same time, we try to simplify it by saying, okay, the HEFA will be the worst in this, like, because when we often do sensitivity analysis, it will be like, oh, in case of when the recycling rate is this is the option. When we have this different, we change this assumption, this is the option. But this is sort of like making them into a coherent line. So instead of having, okay, if this one factor changes, what changes? But it's more that if you actually have a future where it is all climate change priority, this will be the option. So it is a bit more, the attempt was to actually minimize the thought process. Yes, so I think, but then the important thing is that we have to actually agree on what is the climate change minimizing future. So do they actually trust that all the options that I chose is really for climate change minimization? So I think that also maybe the policymakers should also be involved in the data selection process, but do they have time? Yes, so I think, that has to be more shared clearly.
Okay, thank you. I give the floor back to the chair, and it was nice talking with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now is my turn. So thank you very much for this nice presentation. I would also to thank your supervisor to invite me to assist to this event. I would like to talk about your causal loop diagram, because in your causal loop you have in the same description, in fact, the social dimension, the environmental dimension, and also the economic dimension. And perhaps in order to facilitate the reading of this causal loop, perhaps it's good to distinguish the three levels.
Like, you mean that I could categorize the variables in these three?
In order to help.
Yes.
I invite to read the Bautista article on that. And he used exactly the same approach, the causal loop, but he described each causal loop in each dimension.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
And sometimes it's very interesting because, for example, I don't know, to illustrate my talk, okay, you have malnutrition.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
No problem. Okay, you have and you have malnutrition and health. And of course, it's a problem of economic, but it's also a problem of social dimension. And you can measure if it's in which case it is. So it's interesting, and in order to compare your different scenarios, I think it's perhaps interesting.
Yeah, but you mean that I could have like a one diagram where there's only social and only economic, or I kind of mark them on the.
You decide. What I read previously is 1 diagram for one dimension.
Interesting, yeah.
It's just a proposition, and to facilitate the reading of your talk. I have also in the slide 21 is your final 21. No, it's not 20,
no, sorry,
21. Sorry.
I can't. 21. Yes.
Yeah, next one. So, okay, this one is your pilot, but I'm not agree about your pilot, because this pilot is more dedicated about the conventional approach. It's based on what's happened now, and you imagine what is the future. So a little bit confused about that, because this one, in my opinion, I don't know if you agree about my talk, but it's more dedicated to what's happened now. And perhaps it will change in 20 years using bioeconomic concept. You agree about or not?
So the differentiation of these categories itself are, you mean that present oriented, or this logic was more?
I think for the pillar, it's more, I don't know, for the example, the pillar, the pillar 3, perhaps, I don't know what's happening in the future, but perhaps pillar 3 it didn't exist.
It didn't exist?
Yeah, because it will change the approach, because for the moment, the production is driven by the economy, and perhaps, I don't know, in 20 years, the electricity will be driven by the resource. So if you have sun, for example, we can produce electricity and heat. And for the moment, you consider that so we build this pillar according to a conventional approach, and not about your future. So I think it's not relating with your causal loop.
I don't know if I understand it correctly, but I guess what you mean is that now electricity is a factor that can be induced whenever we want. We can have more electricity, but in the future, it can also be a constrained resource.
For the moment, you use electricity if you have money.
Yes.
If you don't have money, you don't use electricity.
Yeah.
But perhaps in the future, you can use electricity if you have sun.
Right. Yeah.
If you have no sun, you cannot produce electricity, and for that reason, you cannot use it.
I think that's an interesting point. So that actually, the things in the induced processes can actually move to more similarly to pillar 2. They may not be byproduct, but they can be constrained because of these legal or social issues. I think that's very interesting. So I think the differentiating the pillars themselves can be valid even in the future, but which options or which cases go into which pillar can definitely change in the future. As you said, electricity might be rationed, right? You know, or there is very much limitation. So I think within the pillars they could move around, maybe.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I'm with you about your methodology,
Yeah.
but just to say pillar 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is like actual vision.
Yes, yeah, they can also change. Yeah, is that
It's just to say, yeah, perhaps because you can perhaps, I don't know, because you are expert on that. I'm not expert, but you are expert. Perhaps you can change the pillar, including the perspective of the causal loop.
yes. Yes, yeah, I think that's very interesting. It's possible. Maybe I can even name the circular economy feedstock, just like constrained feedstock, or it could be possible. Yeah, it's good. I can actually have future aspect in the designing of pillars themselves.
And it's just a question of philosophy about
Yeah.
this, because you imagine what is the future, but your pillar is not.
Yeah.
Just like. In the slide 38. This, yeah. When you talk about the line cost, human health, and climate change, you said human health is a part of social aspect. Is it common to say that?
It's not. It's not like based
I don't
on.
know.
Then where will it be? Human health?
I don't. It's an open question.
Oh. No, it's
not
not.
too close to say the.
Yeah, I mean, it was not very important where like exactly they belong, but for us as an example that we chose one from each dimension, but of course they are blurry and also embedded. So human health, I guess this means like human society. So it's a factor of human society rather than nature. But
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
in that sense.
Perhaps we can discuss about that.
Okay. Is it more than economic dimension or nature dimension or?
I don't know, but yeah, it's a borderline. In your okay, because in your result, okay, you have several results, but you like because I assist to Hugo presentation 1 month ago.
I was also there, yes.
Yeah.
Online.
During his presentation, you have the link between the like a TRL technology level, you know, TRL.
Technological readiness level.
There.
Yeah.
And the different environmental impact. And you, in your study, you have you consider that is a fixed value, you cannot have some uncertainty, etc. Or
there is a lot of uncertainty related
yeah,
to this. Yes, so because we use a lot from the other thesis. So my thesis is more about the framework, the methodology itself.
Yeah, of course.
So when we did the LCA, we used the inventory of the Seung 2022, and also there she selected these technologies for reasons. So she did like a criteria, like an economic dimension, technical readiness level, and then gave the points to choose like why these technologies, because there are many other potential fuels or technologies for aviation industry, right? So they were already selected based on technological readiness level and the cost. So it was considered here. And also when we make selection here, for example, certain technology, we assume that is not available for near-term future.
Sorry, I didn't understand. And I'm sorry. Well, I will ask you some question about stakeholder,
Yes.
but I will try to ask my question differently about the previous examiner. So perhaps can you go to the slide 57, please? Yeah. Okay.
My favorite slide.
Yes,
Yeah.
this slide.
Limitation.
So it's a limitation.
Yeah.
Okay, I agree about your limitation, but in your last sentence,
Yes.
you said limitation is an interpretation. Okay. And before you have several questions about stakeholder, and when you answer, you didn't talk about this sentence. Why?
Why? Why?
Because
the
in my opinion,
Uh-huh.
is a key
Mm.
of stakeholder. Because perhaps we have not the same definition of stakeholder.
Mhm. Yes.
Because in my point of view, just to start, and after you can discuss about that. In my opinion, stakeholder is all participant or the systemic approach. So of course you have. Perhaps you are not agree. Yeah, my colleague is not agree about me, but we can discuss about that. Is it an open discussion too? But the stakeholder, which one is it for you?
For here, I made it very general because also it is that after having this result, I realized, okay, this is kind of complex. And also like from the reviewers and other people that I shared the work, it's like, oh, it's kind of complex just to understand. So it came more later that, oh, okay. So it, for example, policymakers, but also the community members. But I think the first one that came to mind is, okay, if we're going to present this work, it's often the policymakers or the investors, then they can be one of the stakeholders. So then we thought, okay, it's quite complex. So that is one of the limitations. But especially in guiding star selection, the stakeholders don't have to be limited to policymakers. And also the LCA result, often if it's for product, it is often advertised for customers and general public as well. So I think, I don't know what is the thing that you two agree and don't agree, but I think the stakeholders can be very broad, right? It can be often the local community, the employers, even the customers. So I think it can be very diverse, but I have to admit that the consideration about the stakeholders came not during the method development, but afterwards. And then we look at, oh, this is complex, what do we do? Then we need more stakeholder engagement. It was an afterthought.
Yes,
Yeah, there is a standard, ISO 26000. That is about social responsibilities of companies, and it gives a very interesting definition of what is the stakeholders. And because usually in LCA, we consider the stakeholders as people who decide. But no, stakeholders can also people who will endure the consequence of the decisions. And that's so it's much wider than just the people who hold the key of the decision.
Yes.
And that's why it's important, to my opinion, that they should be involved into the design of scenarios, not only and all stakeholders, no? And then they should discuss about the results with a collective discussion, because some of them may pay the cost of others' decisions. So this is the idea of the ISO 26000.
Could be about. Yeah. And this limitation, did you analyze the limitation at the end of your tests or in the beginning?
Data.
The last one.
Later one.
Yeah.
No, at the end of the more to the end.
And if you now, if you come back in the past, how do you, because I understand all of the three first one. Okay, I'm agree. I'm thinking it's like it's common limitation, in my opinion. But the last one, if you now you know that's your limitation.
Yes.
If you change, if you are in the past, so you make again your PhD.
Yeah. Oh, seriously.
Yeah, it's a game. Of course, it's not the reality.
Yeah. How?
Did you have some idea to limit to delete this limitation
Yeah.
or not?
I think it's one of the possibility, as mentioned before, is to actually engage stakeholders also during the method development. So now it was we did not do any qualitative research engaging other people, but I think that could be interesting. If you actually involve them in the method, it could also help them to interpret it and then also have opinions on how to actually present the data. I think that is one way. What else? Yeah, I think the data complexity actually comes from having many options. So like 6 options for each cases, which can be multiplying easily to 100 and few hundred. Yeah, but as Linda mentioned before, opening up the black box of what are the important factors that should actually be considered and sharing them with the stakeholders can be beneficial. But I don't know. This is a limitation, big limitation. Because I think when I presented it, I didn't think they were very complex. But then I shared it. Oh, everyone said it's very complex. For me, like I think it does help the fact that I was looking at it for very many years. So it is like, okay, for me, it is a bit more clear. So, but then you cannot, I don't know, because I guess LCA results, when you publish it, it can be used for broader community than you intended originally, right? So even if you engage stakeholders in the beginning, then they can understand it better, but not if you publish it and other people might not. So there could still be limitations, but I think it will still help have them involved, the ones who will be affected. But you can, yeah, but
Yeah.
in general public, you cannot engage general public. So I think it is definitely, I will think about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much for a very nice presentation. So now I will invite Livia to give you some work. So Livia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, many thanks for your work to do this thesis. For all the members of the jury, online also. Thank you, Stephen and Linda. I would like to say that for me, this is a comment for me, but louder. And for me, this thesis is an important point because Sonia is the last PhD student co-supervised with Lori. So a series of 4 PhD students, Zhu, Hugo, Pla, and me. So for me, it was a super experience, and hope that this tandem with Lori will continue a long time. This was a remark estimated mainly for Lori. And for you also, for you and for the and maybe online in Hafla, I don't know. Or you. Thank you for all these moments spent together. Yes, Sonia, I was used to see you in our floor in this lab in our apartment. And as Hugo, Pla, and Zhu, you represent a very important figure for me, from many points of view. So now for you, Sonia, I am very happy for the results, for the final finish of this thesis and for the final results. And I congratulate you for the report, but also for this presentation. Congratulations. It was a little bit long, for the basis, but we had also COVID.
Ah, yes, the period, yes.
And it's was not easy for some PhD students. So I have no scientific questions. Maybe one thing. You spoke about desired futures.
Yes.
Which is yours.
My desired future.
Yeah, from professional point of view.
Yeah. From professional point of view,
Which is your desired.
well, my contract is over. By my professional point, I am a person who does not belong anywhere professionally. I don't know. Desired future.
Holiday.
I think for me, the desired future is more where we cooperate and there are more communities that take care of each other. So it can be about, here it was very much numbers, right? Human health impact, climate change impact that were measurable in the indicators that we have. But I think it can be actually something more that those mitigations come from more social aspect, that we do take care of each other, humans, non-human animals, and so on, that are in much more cooperation. And I think for me, the interesting thing was that there were some people doing work to build, like actually working with the activists, because the activists have burnout and so on. And then there were lots of work to take care of themselves. And then what they said is that what she does is to make sure that people don't stab on each other's back when the crisis comes. And I think that is very important that we know that we can take care of each other. So that is my desired world, where we don't step on each other's back when there are crises, which is already, so I also think interesting was that we talk about this climate crisis, okay, there will be not enough food, very hot, but that's us in the global north. And then this is already present or even past in many parts of the world. So I think there is also the community and people taking care of each other is the most important thing. So that is my desired world.
And for your professional life?
Professional life, yes, I will definitely want to work in community building. Yes, and then it's a transition. I also want to work in, so maybe corporate sustainability. As you know, they have big impacts and they can have bad impact, but also can play a big role. So I want to do them both, community building and increasing the sustainability of our organizations.
Thank you. Laurie, have you some work?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I would like to congratulate you on your presentation today. You really impressed me. You did so well, and it was such a pleasure for me that we are together from the beginning. As you say, we met mostly every week. So to see your performance today was such a pleasure. So congratulations on that. You're also a special PhD student in one sense, also for me, because you are the first one I employed from the project resource. So yes, to see you graduating doing your defense today is also reminds me of all that. Your project was not easy. I think some projects are easier than others. This was highly explorative. So the challenge was huge. Which I mentioned, there's been some obstacles along the way. There's been COVID. So, but at the end, I think you're a good example of the curve. You know, this was the curve was very fast at the end. You made it all nicely together. Yes, and I also wanted to say that you are very capable. So I think you underestimate yourself. Maybe I put it also sometimes, but you should really believe in yourself. There are a lot of capabilities. And I wanted to thank the jury members for the discussion today. So I think it was very inspiring for us as the supervisors. And for the two remaining papers, a lot of comments were very useful for improving these two last papers. And well, the first one is already published, but it was also interesting personally, I did not realize the originality, and I think it's right, actually. No one has done that in this perspective of reviewing before applying the causal background. Perhaps just a little general question. What, now that all of that is done, what would you see as your piece to the puzzle? What is your contribution to science with a big S, or your major contribution in these 3 years and a half?
You asked this to all the PhD students.
In different words.
Yeah. Everyone who you can attend as a committee member to prepare for this question. It's a difficult one. Yes, I think it is also that there are many, I guess, lots of rising concerns about, having these models that are very important, but also maybe a little bit difficult to understand. So I think for me, it's that we want to introduce alternative decision-making paradigm into a system where it did not exist. So I think that could be interesting, and it cannot be applied in LCA, but also in other things as well. But for us, yeah, I think it was to make LCA a bit more simpler. So I thought it was going to make it simpler, but then the result is complex. But still, I think the guiding star concept, I think, also came from Lori, and then we wanted to have this value and how to implement it in a bit more radical. I think the science can also talk about more radical transition, maybe one of the contributions.
Okay, thank you. Before to close this second session, I will ask if some doctor present in the audience will ask you some question.
Oh, in the audience.
Yeah.
They all left? No, there's the
Some question in line or here in the room. No? No doctor will ask some question?
There's only one.
Okay, so you are looking a question about the audience. Thank you very much. So I propose to close this second phase.